How did someone think they were completely immune to consequences? Judge Blackwell ruled our county like a king for 37 years. Everyone knew he took bribes, fixed cases, and protected his wealthy friends. But nobody talked about it, not if they wanted to stay out of prison. I learned this the hard way when I was 19. My dad owned a small construction company. Honest work, honest pay. Then Councilman Reeves decided he wanted Dad's land for a shopping development. Dad refused to sell. The offer was insulting, and that property had been in our family for 3 generations. 2 weeks later, building inspectors swarmed our job sites. Suddenly, every project Dad had ever worked on had code violations. The fines were crushing, $50,000 in penalties for work that had passed inspection just months before. Dad hired a lawyer and fought back. We had photos, documentation, witness testimony proving the inspections were bogus. It should have been an easy win. That's when I first sat in Judge Blackwell's courtroom. He was a massive man with silver hair and cold eyes that looked right through you. Before our case was even called, I watched him dismiss 3 other appeals against the city. His pattern was obvious. Anyone fighting City Hall lost, no matter how strong their evidence. When Dad's lawyer presented our case, Blackwell barely looked at the documents. "Motion denied," he said, banging his gavel. "Mr. Crawford, your reputation for shoddy workmanship precedes you." Dad had never had a single legitimate complaint in 20 years. The bankruptcy followed quickly. We lost the business, the house, everything. Dad started drinking heavily. Whiskey for breakfast, passed out on the couch by noon. Mom picked up 2 minimum wage jobs just to keep us fed, working 18-hour days until her hands bled from scrubbing floors. My college fund disappeared into legal fees and debt payments. We went from middle-class stability to food stamps and eviction notices in 6 months. But the worst part came 6 months later. I was walking downtown when I saw Reeves coming out of an expensive restaurant with Judge Blackwell. They were laughing, shaking hands. Reeves handed Blackwell an envelope, thick, white, obviously stuffed with cash. That's when I understood. Dad hadn't lost because we had a weak case. He'd lost because the game was rigged from the start. I spent the next 8 years watching Blackwell destroy other families the same way. The Hendersons lost their farm to eminent domain, 3 generations of cornfields seized for a golf course that was never built. The Liu family's restaurant was shut down for health violations that magically appeared after they refused to pay protection money to the right councilman. Mrs. Patterson lost custody of her kids when she couldn't afford the legal fees to fight her ex-husband's bought-and-paid-for lawyer. Anyone who challenged the system got crushed. The Williamson case still haunts me. Their teenage son was killed by a drunk driver, the son of a city councilman. Instead of vehicular manslaughter charges, the kid got community service and a sealed juvenile record. The Williamsons hired every lawyer they could afford, fought for 3 years, and watched Judge Blackwell dismiss every appeal with the same cold indifference. Mrs. Williamson had a nervous breakdown during the final hearing. Mr. Williamson started drinking and never stopped. Their marriage didn't survive the injustice. Meanwhile, Blackwell lived like royalty. Massive house on the hill with marble columns and a circular driveway, expensive cars that cost more than most people made in 5 years, annual trips to Europe where he bragged about his consulting fees. Everyone knew where the money came from. Nobody dared say it out loud. Until the night I decided I'd had enough. I'd spent 3 years working at the courthouse as a janitor, invisible, ignored, perfectly positioned to see everything. I knew about the secret meetings in Blackwell's chambers after hours. I knew about the second set of case files he kept locked in his private safe. I knew about the special phone he used for calls that couldn't be traced. Most importantly, I knew about tomorrow night's meeting. Reeves was bringing the mayor, 2 other judges, and enough cash to fund a small war. They were planning to fix the biggest case of Blackwell's career, a murder trial where the defendant's family had offered $5 million to make the charges disappear. But tomorrow night, they wouldn't be meeting alone. The defendant was Theodore Westbrook III, heir to a pharmaceutical fortune, accused of running down a family of 4 while driving drunk. The victims were the Morales family, Maria, a nurse, her husband Carlos, a teacher, and their twin daughters, age 7. Theodore had fled the scene, leaving them to die on the roadside. The evidence was overwhelming. Witnesses, security footage, Theodore's blood alcohol level still twice the legal limit when police found him at his mansion 3 hours later. It should have been the easiest conviction in the world. Instead, Theodore's family had made the Blackwell corruption machine an offer it couldn't refuse. $5 million to make the case disappear. Witness intimidation, evidence tampering, whatever it took. And if that failed, a hung jury filled with bought-and-paid-for citizens who would never vote to convict. The meeting was set for Friday night, after the courthouse closed. Blackwell's chambers, 10 p.m. sharp. I'd been planning for this moment for 6 months. The first step was getting into Blackwell's private safe. I'd watched him input the combination dozens of times. His wife's birthday, the predictable bastard. Inside, I found what I expected. Records of every bribe, every fixed case, every life he'd destroyed for money. But I also found something better. Bank records, offshore accounts. A complete financial trail showing exactly where every dollar had come from and where it had gone. The records went back decades. Names I recognized, cases I remembered, families I'd watched suffer. The Martinez deportation case from 2018, the family had been here legally for 15 years, but the judge needed to show tough immigration enforcement for political points. The children, born in America, were separated from their parents for 8 months while the appeals process dragged on. Blackwell had received $75,000 to deny every motion. The Foster embezzlement trial from 2016, a church treasurer accused of stealing from the building fund. The evidence was circumstantial at best, but Foster couldn't afford the kind of lawyer that would actually fight. Meanwhile, the real embezzler, the pastor's son, walked free after his family donated $50,000 to Blackwell's retirement fund. Case after case, life after life, destroyed for money. The second step was surveillance equipment. I'd slowly installed tiny cameras and microphones throughout Blackwell's chambers over the past 2 months. Each device was smaller than a penny, placed during my regular cleaning routine. The feeds went to a secure server I'd set up in an abandoned warehouse across town. The third step was insurance. I copied everything: the financial records, the case files, the communication logs. I burned it all to encrypted drives and hid copies in safety deposit boxes in 3 different cities. I sent sealed packages to investigative journalists at major newspapers with instructions to open them if anything happened to me. But the most important step was getting Detective Torres on board. Torres was one of the few honest cops left in our department. His partner had been transferred to traffic duty after asking too many questions about why certain cases kept getting dismissed. Torres himself was under constant scrutiny, passed over for promotion, assigned to the worst shifts. He was also Carlos Morales' cousin. I approached him carefully in the courthouse break room during a night shift when we were alone. "How much do you want to see Theodore Westbrook convicted?" I asked. Torres looked at me suspiciously. Janitors weren't supposed to know about pending cases. "What kind of question is that?" I pulled out my phone and showed him a photo I'd taken the previous week. Reeves handing Blackwell another envelope, this time outside the country club. The kind that might give you the chance to put away some very bad people. I told him everything, about the corruption network, about the planned meeting, about my surveillance setup. Torres listened without interrupting, his jaw tightening with each revelation. "You realize this is enough to get us both killed," he said finally. "Only if we fail." Torres was quiet for a long moment, studying the photos on my phone. "Carlos's daughters would be 9 years old next month," he said finally. "They were going to start soccer season. Maria had their uniforms laid out the night before the accident." He looked up at me with steel in his eyes. "What do you need me to do?" Friday night arrived cold and rainy. Perfect weather for ending a 37-year crime spree. I was in position by 8 p.m., watching from the abandoned building across the street. My equipment was recording everything, streaming live to multiple backup servers. Torres was parked 2 blocks away with a tactical team he'd assembled from state police, officers who couldn't be bought by local corruption. At 9:47 p.m., Reeves arrived with a large briefcase. Mayor Caldwell followed 10 minutes later, accompanied by Judge Morrison from the next county. The final guest was Theodore Westbrook Sr., personally delivering the final payment to ensure his son's freedom. They gathered in Blackwell's chambers, scotch poured, money counted, futures decided. I watched through my feeds as Blackwell opened the briefcase. Stacks of hundreds, more cash than most people see in a lifetime. Theodore Sr. smiled as he outlined the plan. "The witnesses will recant. Memory is such a fragile thing. The evidence will be compromised. Chain of custody errors happen. The jury will have reasonable doubts." Then Blackwell said the words I'd been waiting to hear. "Gentlemen, let me be absolutely clear. Theodore Westbrook III will never see the inside of a prison cell. This case dies tonight, and it stays dead. We've been managing this county for decades, and no one, not the state police, not the media, not the federal government, can touch us here." That's when Torres and his team made their move. The doors burst open simultaneously, front and back exits, no chance for escape. State police officers in full tactical gear flooded the room, weapons drawn, shouting commands. "State police, nobody move!" The expressions on their faces were priceless. Complete shock, like they couldn't comprehend that their untouchable little kingdom was crumbling around them. Blackwell tried to bluster. "This is outrageous! I'm a sitting judge! You have no authority here!" Torres stepped into the room, badge visible, recording device in hand. "Actually, Judge Blackwell, we have all the authority we need. Conspiracy to obstruct justice, accepting bribes, corruption under color of law. You've been very helpful in documenting your crimes tonight." Mayor Caldwell made a run for it. 63 years old, 200 pounds, trying to sprint down a courthouse hallway in dress shoes. He made it exactly 12 feet before face-planting into a water fountain. The sound of his face hitting marble echoed through the building like a gunshot. When they helped him up, his nose was broken and blood covered his white dress shirt. Reeves tried a different approach, claiming he was there under duress, that Blackwell had threatened him. It might have worked if we hadn't recorded him bragging about previous bribes just minutes earlier. Judge Morrison attempted to assert judicial immunity, apparently not understanding that immunity doesn't cover criminal conspiracy. He kept repeating, "I have judicial immunity," like a mantra, while they put him in handcuffs. Theodore Sr. offered the officers money. Right there, in front of everyone, he tried to bribe state police officers. The man was so used to buying his way out of trouble that he couldn't conceive of a situation where money wouldn't work. "I can write you a check right now," he said desperately. "Whatever you want. Name your price." The arresting officer just shook his head. "Sir, you're under arrest for attempting to bribe a law enforcement officer. You have the right to remain silent." By midnight, all 5 were in custody. The briefcase full of cash, the financial records, the recorded conversations, everything was evidence in what would become the largest corruption case in state history. But the best part was yet to come. While the arrests were happening, Torres had sent teams to simultaneous raids across the county. Every business that had paid protection money, every official who had taken bribes, every dirty cop who had looked the other way, we had records of all of them. The net was wide and the evidence was overwhelming. By dawn, 17 people were under arrest. By the end of the week, that number had grown to 43 as lower-level players started flipping on their bosses to cut deals. Police Chief Morrison, no relation to the judge, was arrested at his son's Little League game. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. For 15 years, he'd taken money to look the other way while corruption destroyed other families. Now his own son watched from the dugout as his father was led away in handcuffs. City Inspector Rodriguez, who had fabricated the violations that destroyed my father's business, was arrested at his daughter's wedding reception. The photographer captured the moment perfectly. Rodriguez in his tuxedo, hands behind his back, bride crying in her wedding dress as guests scattered. Each arrest felt like justice delayed, but finally delivered. The media descended like vultures on fresh roadkill. National news crews, investigative journalists, federal prosecutors. Our quiet little county became the poster child for small-town corruption. CNN ran a week-long series called Bought Justice. Fox News called it The Swamp in Small-Town America. MSNBC featured hour-long specials on judicial corruption. Every major newspaper sent reporters to dig deeper into the story. The courthouse became a tourist attraction. People drove hours just to take photos outside the building where the biggest corruption bust in state history had gone down. The trial started 6 months later. I testified for 8 straight days, walking the jury through years of documented evidence. The financial records, the surveillance footage, the recorded conversations, piece by piece I laid out the entire conspiracy. Blackwell's defense team tried to paint me as a disgruntled employee with a vendetta. They weren't wrong about the vendetta part, but when you have 37 years of recorded crimes, motivation becomes irrelevant. Isn't it true, Blackwell's lawyer asked during cross-examination, that you began this surveillance out of personal anger over your family's financial difficulties? Yes, I replied. I was angry that a corrupt judge destroyed my family for money, but I documented his crimes, not my feelings. And isn't it true that you illegally entered Judge Blackwell's private chambers? I was employed as a janitor. Those chambers were part of my assigned cleaning area, but you accessed his private safe without authorization. I watched him open it dozens of times while cleaning his office. He never told me the combination was secret. The lawyer was fishing, trying to get the evidence thrown out on technicalities, but Torres had worked with prosecutors to ensure everything was admissible. The judge presiding over the case was brought in from another state to ensure impartiality. Judge Patricia Holbrook had a reputation for fairness and zero tolerance for corruption. When Blackwell took the stand in his own defense, it was a masterclass in self-destruction. I served this community faithfully for decades, he declared. These accusations are politically motivated attacks on the judicial system itself. The prosecutor simply played back Blackwell's own words from the surveillance recordings. Theodore Westbrook III will never see the inside of a prison cell. We've been managing this county for decades, and no one can touch us here. The contrast between his courtroom denials and his recorded admissions was devastating. Judge Blackwell, the prosecutor continued, did you or did you not accept $75,000 to deny the Martinez family's immigration appeals? I resent the implication. It's not an implication. It's a bank record. The money was deposited into your offshore account 3 days after you denied their final appeal. The prosecutor methodically went through case after case, bribe after bribe, life after life destroyed for money. The jury was out for exactly 47 minutes. Guilty on all counts. Judge Blackwell was sentenced to 35 years in federal prison. At 72 years old, it was effectively a life sentence. Reeves got 28 years. Mayor Caldwell got 15. Judge Morrison got 12. Theodore Sr. got 8 years for bribery and conspiracy. Theodore Jr. His murder trial proceeded with a clean judge, untainted evidence, and honest witnesses. He was convicted and sentenced to life without parole. Justice for the Morales family finally served. The ripple effects continued for years. 43 convictions total, ranging from police officers to city council members to local business owners. The entire power structure of our county was dismantled and rebuilt from scratch. Property seized through civil forfeiture, Blackwell's mansion, his cars, his offshore accounts, was sold to fund victim compensation. Dad got a check for $847,000, enough to restart his business and rebuild our family's life. The Hendersons got their farm back when the eminent domain ruling was overturned. The Liu family reopened their restaurant and won a $2.3 million settlement from the city. The Williamsons received $1, $8 million in compensation, and used part of it to establish a scholarship fund in their son's name. Every family destroyed by the corruption network received compensation and the chance to rebuild. Detective Torres was promoted to chief of police and brought in officers from outside the county to clean house. The entire department was rebuilt from the ground up. I quit my janitor job and used my share of the whistleblower reward to finish college. Studied journalism, with a focus on investigative reporting. Turns out I had a talent for uncovering corruption. 3 years later, I received a letter in the mail. No return address, just a federal prison postmark. Inside was a single sheet of notebook paper with a message written in shaky handwriting. You think you've won, but this isn't over. I have friends you've never heard of. Money you'll never find. When I get out, I'm coming for you. It was signed, Judge Blackwell. I showed the letter to Torres, now Chief Torres. He laughed and filed it with the dozens of other threats we'd received over the years. He's 75 years old in a federal prison, Torres said. His earliest possible parole date is when he's 98. I wouldn't worry about it, but I did worry about it, because I knew something Torres didn't. 3 weeks before the arrests, I discovered another set of records in Blackwell's safe. Records that suggested the corruption network extended far beyond our little county. Names, dates, transactions involving judges and politicians in 6 different states. I'd made copies, of course, but I'd never shared them with anyone. The local investigation was big enough. Adding federal politicians and interstate conspiracy charges would have complicated everything beyond belief. Now, sitting in my apartment reading Blackwell's threat, I realized my mistake. 37 years of corruption doesn't just disappear when you arrest the local players. It metastasizes, spreads, adapts. The network Blackwell had built was bigger than any of us had imagined, and somewhere out there, the remaining members were very unhappy with the young man who had destroyed their operation. The phone rang. Unknown number, blocked caller ID. I answered anyway. Mr. Crawford? The voice was smooth, professional, unthreatening. Yes, my name is Davidson. I represent certain interests that were affected by your activities regarding Judge Blackwell. My blood went cold. I think you have the wrong number. I don't think I do. We need to meet, tonight, to discuss some mutual concerns. I'm not interested in meeting anyone. Oh, but you are, because we have your sister. The line went dead. My sister lived 3 states away, working as a teacher in Oregon. We'd specifically moved her after the trials, afraid of exactly this kind of retaliation. I called her cell phone, straight to voicemail. I called her school. She hadn't shown up for work that morning. I called her apartment building. Her neighbors said 2 men in suits had been asking questions about her yesterday. My hands were shaking as I dialed Torres. Chief, it's me. They took Lauren. Who took Lauren? The network. It's bigger than we thought. They want to meet. Torres was quiet for a long moment. Where? I don't know yet. They said they'd call back. Don't you dare meet them alone. We'll set up surveillance, bring in federal backup. They'll kill her if they see cops. They'll kill you both anyway. This isn't negotiable. But it was negotiable. Because while Torres was a good cop, he didn't understand what I understood. Some people think they're completely immune to consequences until the moment they realize they're not. The network that had protected Blackwell thought they were safe in their shadows, pulling strings from a distance. They thought they could threaten me, intimidate me, make me disappear quietly. They had no idea who they were dealing with. The phone rang again at midnight. Mr. Crawford, I trust you've had time to consider our conversation. Where is my sister? She's safe, for now. But her continued safety depends entirely on your cooperation. What do you want? Simple. We want the records you haven't shared yet. The files from Blackwell's safe that mentioned our associates in other states. You're going to retrieve them and deliver them to us. Tonight. And if I don't? Then your sister joins the many unfortunate people who have disappeared over the years. Car accidents happen. Gas leaks occur. Young women walking alone at night encounter random violence. You're threatening to kill her. I'm explaining the natural consequences of unwise choices. The meeting is at the old Riverside warehouse, 2 a.m. Come alone. Bring everything. The line went dead again. I sat in my apartment, staring at the phone, thinking through my options. Option 1. Call Torres, bring in law enforcement, hope they could track down Lauren before the network killed her. Possible, but risky. Option 2. Meet their demands, hand over the files, hope they kept their word about releasing Lauren. Naive and almost certainly fatal. Option 3. Give them exactly what they deserved. I'd spent 3 years preparing for this moment, even though I'd hoped it would never come. The records they wanted were indeed hidden, but not where they thought. I'd built multiple false trails, dummy files, encrypted decoys. Let them think they knew where everything was hidden. Meanwhile, the real files were already in the hands of someone they'd never suspect. My investigative journalism professor, Dr. Elizabeth Warren, not the senator, different person entirely, had been working on a series about interstate judicial corruption. I'd been feeding her information for months, building an airtight case that connected corruption networks across 6 states. The story was scheduled to publish in 72 hours in the Washington Post, with simultaneous releases in regional newspapers across the affected states. But 72 hours was too long if Lauren was going to die tonight. So I made a call. Dr. Warren, it's me. We need to accelerate the timeline. What's happening? I explained the situation quickly. Jesus Christ, she said. How many people are involved in this thing? Based on the records? At least 200. Judges, prosecutors, police chiefs, mayors, state legislators. It's bigger than we thought. And they took your sister? They think I'm just some janitor who got lucky. They have no idea what's coming. Dr. Warren was quiet for a moment. The story goes live in 6 hours. Every major news outlet, simultaneous release. Federal prosecutors in 6 states are standing by with sealed indictments. That won't save Lauren. No, but this might. She explained her plan. It was risky, complicated, and required perfect timing. It was also the only chance Lauren had. At 1:30 a.m., I drove to the Riverside warehouse. Old industrial building, abandoned for years. Perfect place for a clandestine meeting or a murder. I brought a briefcase full of files, carefully crafted forgeries that would take hours to verify. What I didn't bring was backup. What I did bring was something better. The warehouse was dark except for a single light in the center of the main floor. As I approached, figures emerged from the shadows. 6 men in expensive suits, professional and cold. The man in the center stepped forward, mid-50s, silver hair, carrying himself like someone accustomed to power. Mr. Crawford, I'm Davidson. Thank you for coming. Where's my sister? Davidson nodded, and 2 of his men brought Lauren forward. She was alive, unharmed, but scared. duct tape over her mouth, hands zip-tied behind her back. "The files," Davidson said. I held up the briefcase. "My sister first," Davidson smiled. "I'm afraid that's not how this works. Files first, then we'll discuss your sister's fate." "That wasn't the deal, Mr. Crawford. You seem to be under the impression that you have leverage here. You don't. You're a small-town janitor who stumbled onto something bigger than he can understand. You've caused us significant inconvenience, but ultimately, you're just a loose end to be tied up." "Actually," I said, checking my watch, "I'm a nationally published investigative journalist whose story about interstate judicial corruption just went live on the Washington Post website." Davidson's confident expression faltered slightly. "What story?" "The one that names you, specifically, as the coordinator of a criminal network spanning 6 states. The one that details your involvement in 47 murders disguised as accidents over the past 15 years. The one that provides financial records linking you to bribe judges in Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Florida." I pulled out my phone and showed him the headline, "Shadow Network: How a Judicial Corruption Ring Controlled Justice Across the Southeast." Davidson's face went white. "That's impossible. Those records were destroyed. Some of them were. But you made a critical error, Davidson. You assumed that a small-town janitor couldn't possibly understand the scope of what he'd discovered." The warehouse suddenly filled with light as law enforcement vehicles surrounded the building. FBI, state police from 6 different states, U.S. Marshals. "You see," I continued as armed agents poured through every entrance, "while you were focused on the local corruption we'd already exposed, I was documenting the interstate operation. 237 officials across 6 states, all connected through your little network." Davidson made a move toward his gun, but found himself face down on the concrete with an FBI agent's knee in his back before he could clear leather. "The story is already published," I called out as they cuffed him. "Sealed indictments are being opened in 6 states. By morning, your entire network will be in custody." Agent Martinez, the FBI task force leader, cut Lauren free while his team secured the remaining men. "You okay?" he asked her. Lauren nodded, pulling the tape from her mouth. "I'm fine, but how did you know they'd be here?" "Your brother's been working with us for 8 months, Martinez explained. "Building the case, documenting the network. Tonight was the last piece we needed, getting Davidson to incriminate himself on tape." I held up my phone, still recording. 47 murders, Davidson. We have financial records linking you to every single one." As they led him away, Davidson looked back at me with pure hatred. "This isn't over, Crawford. You have no idea how deep this goes." "Actually," I said, "I do. The story publishes the complete network tomorrow. All of it. Every name, every connection, every crime. Your immunity just expired." The next 72 hours were a whirlwind of arrests, indictments, and media coverage. The story exploded across national news, the largest corruption investigation in U.S. history. 237 arrests across 6 states, 47 murder charges based on the financial evidence we'd uncovered, hundreds of wrongful convictions overturned, thousands of victims receiving compensation. The scope was staggering. Mayors, judges, prosecutors, police chiefs, state legislators, the network had infected every level of government across the southeastern United States. They'd operated with impunity for decades, believing their wealth and connections made them untouchable. Governor Hendricks of Alabama, no relation to the farming family, was arrested at a campaign fundraiser. He'd been taking money to appoint corrupt judges to the state Supreme Court. His political career ended with him being led away in handcuffs while donors fled the hotel ballroom. State Senator Phillips of Georgia was found dead in his garage, apparent suicide by carbon monoxide poisoning. He'd left a note confessing to accepting bribes and naming other officials in the network. Even in death, he was still giving up his co-conspirators. Federal Judge Collins of North Carolina had been selling verdicts in civil cases for 15 years. The evidence showed he'd fixed corporate lawsuits, wrongful death suits, even divorce proceedings where wealthy spouses wanted favorable custody arrangements. His chambers were raided at dawn, and agents found $1.2 million in cash hidden behind law books. Judge Blackwell, already serving 35 years, was indicted on 17 additional murder charges. His sentence was upgraded to life without parole. Davidson received 6 consecutive life sentences, one for each state where he'd coordinated murders. The entire shadow network that had operated for decades, believing themselves immune to consequences, was completely dismantled. Dr. Warren won a Pulitzer Prize for her reporting. I was offered a job with the Washington Post's investigative team. Lauren went back to teaching, but with a security detail until we were certain every network member was in custody. The aftermath continued to unfold for years. Special prosecutors were appointed in all 6 states to review every case that had passed through the corrupt courts. Thousands of convictions were overturned, sentences were commuted, and wrongfully imprisoned people were released. The financial restitution was unprecedented. Asset forfeiture from the corrupt officials and their conspirators created a victim compensation fund worth over $200 million. Families who had been destroyed by bought verdicts finally received justice and the resources to rebuild their lives. My father used his compensation to restart his construction company, but this time with a difference. He specialized in building affordable housing and never charged more than cost plus a modest profit. "I remember what it's like to lose everything," he'd tell his employees. "Nobody should have to go through that." 6 months later, I received another letter from prison, this time from Davidson. "You think you've won," it read, "but there are others, bigger networks, more powerful people. You've only scratched the surface. I showed the letter to Agent Martinez, who was wrapping up the investigation. He's trying to get under your skin, Martinez said. Classic intimidation tactic. Maybe. Or maybe he's telling the truth. Martinez looked at me seriously. You planning to go looking for more corruption networks? I thought about my dad, working 16-hour days to rebuild his business after nearly losing everything to Blackwell's greed. I thought about the Morales family, killed by a drunk driver whose family bought his freedom. I thought about Lauren, kidnapped and threatened because she had the misfortune of being related to someone who refused to stay silent. I thought about all the families destroyed by people who believed they were immune to consequences. Yeah, I said. I think I am. Because here's what Davidson and people like him never understood. Consequences don't disappear just because you have money or power or connections. They just get delayed. And sometimes when they finally arrive, they bring friends. The investigation into interstate judicial corruption became a template for rooting out similar networks in other regions. Federal task forces were established specifically to identify and dismantle corruption rings that crossed state lines. My role evolved from local whistleblower to national expert on judicial corruption. I testified before congressional committees, helped design new oversight protocols, and continued investigating similar networks across the country. Because Davidson was right about one thing, we had only scratched the surface. But every surface can be scratched away layer by layer until the truth underneath is finally exposed. And every person who thinks they're immune to consequences eventually learns the same lesson. Nobody is untouchable, nobody is above the law, and nobody stays hidden forever. The people who destroyed my family thought they were kings ruling their little kingdom, protected by money and power and 37 years of successful corruption. They thought consequences were for other people. They thought wrong. And somewhere out there, imprisoned across 6 states, they have the rest of their lives to think about how completely, catastrophically wrong they were. The federal task force I joined has investigated corruption networks in 12 states and counting. Each investigation follows the same pattern. Powerful people believing they're immune to consequences until the moment they realize they're not. We've taken down mayors, governors, federal judges, and entire police departments. We've recovered hundreds of millions in stolen money and freed thousands of wrongfully convicted people. And with each investigation, the message becomes clearer. Your immunity has expired. Your time is up. Your consequences have arrived.